An excerpt from D. Horn's essay, Dancing Along the Precipice. Quote, "While some writers and critics argue that all writing is a form of appropriation, and that it is a writer's prerogative to borrow material wherever he sees fit, others acknowledge that appropriation may have negative consequences, but argue they can use material from different cultures as long as they are responsible and their research is accurate." Unquote. You're listening to Digging Star Wars, the online journal of the films that inspired George Lucas to create the Star Wars saga. I'm your host, Chris Mitch. D. Horn's quote at the top of this episode hit home with me when I first read it a month or so ago. As our faithful listeners fully know, the appropriation factor is at the heart of our podcast. With each Digging Star Wars episode, we look at various sources that may or may not have inspired Star Wars creator George Lucas and his company to fashion his ongoing famed space opera. And, while we usually explore pre-Star Wars films in our podcast, today's episode considers noted and revered Kiowa Cherokee author N. Scott Momaday's novel Housemaid of Dawn, and the three-part Mortis series in the animated Star Wars television program, The Clone Wars. Momaday's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Housemaid of Dawn was produced as a feature film in 1987, and, unfortunately, copies of the film are hard to come by. My research shows that the film adaptation is not available in the Chester County or Westchester University libraries, nor is it available via Netflix. Only VHS copies of the film are available for purchase on Amazon.com and starting at the market price of $45. However, the film version of Housemaid of Dawn received scathing reviews at best. For our purposes, we'll stick to Momaday's original award-winning novel. I first read Housemaid of Dawn earlier this year during a Westchester University literature course taught by Professor Carla Verderam. Housemaid of Dawn is a story of a Native American World War II vet named Abel and his struggle for identity within both mainstream and Native American culture. It's a riveting, modernistic tale that possesses an involved exploration of good and evil. Around the same time I was ingesting Momaday's novel, the three-part Clone Wars series involving the world of Mortis aired on the Cartoon Network. I was struck by the similarities in both Momaday's novel and the Clone Wars Mortis Trilogy. Just as Momaday's Housemaid of Dawn challenges non-Native Americans to reconsider the reality of evil, the Clone Wars Mortis Trilogy challenges the audience to consider the existence, need, and identity of evil in regards to the mystical element of the Force. Ever since the release of the first Star Wars film in 1977, the nature of the Force has been both a favorite topic of discussion among fans and a concept that has been shaped and reshaped along with our expectations of the Star Wars galaxy. In the 1977 Star Wars film Star Wars Episode IV: A New Hope, Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi teaches Luke Skywalker that the Force is a mystical energy field that simultaneously penetrates the galaxy's inhabitants and binds the galaxy together. It can guide an individual's actions or can be subdued and harnessed to do one's will. With the sequels in the original Star Wars trilogy, Lucas would expand upon the nature of the Force, exposing that both the good Jedi Knights and the evil Sith Lords have mastery over the Force and use it for their own designs. This Force within the Star Wars films was based on a combination of Judeo-Christian, Buddhist, and additional belief systems. Ultimately, all aspects of the Force pointed towards good defeating evil. The controversial nature of the Force surfaced with the Star Wars prequels. Lucas further explored the Force, or one could say he redefined the Force, with the notion that one's adeptness with the Force was based on the count of certain microscopic symbiotic life forms that live within each individual. Anakin Skywalker, the main figure in the prequels and the man who would eventually become evil Darth Vader, had the highest known midichlorian count and was deemed the Chosen One, a prophesized individual that would bring balance to the Force. While the simple math, most midichlorian approach to the Force angered fans of the classic Star Wars trilogy, who favored a more spiritual nature to the Force, the midichlorian-driven Force set into motion several new Star Wars tales and possibilities, which leads us up to the Mortis Trilogy. Christian Taylor, who has also written for the critically acclaimed television series Lost, as well as 6 Feet Under, penned this 3-part Clone Wars series consisting of 3 episodes entitled Overlords, The Altar of Mortis, and The Ghosts of Mortis. The Mortis Trilogy, along with the entire Clone Wars series, occurs prior to the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker's fall from grace and transformation into the evil Darth Vader. Promoted on the Cartoon Network as revealing the secret of the origin of the Force, the Mortis Trilogy also centered on the identity of the Chosen One. As of this recording, all 3 of these episodes are no longer available for online viewing at the official Star Wars website, perhaps in preparation for the release of a Clone Wars Season 3 DVD box set. However, a brief synopsis of each episode is available on StarWars.com, and I would like to read them to you now. The synopsis of Overlords reads, quote, "A mysterious force draws Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Ahsoka to a distant planet and its inhabitants, a family of exceptionally powerful Force wielders, in an attempt to determine whether Anakin is truly the Chosen One. The patriarch of this family, known only as the Father, has spent ages maintaining the balance between his daughter, who is strong with the light side of the Force, and his son, who aligns with the dark. The Father reveals his days are numbered, and he seeks Anakin to take his place as the fulcrum of this balance. A series of tests proves that Anakin is capable of controlling both offspring, as the Father does, but Skywalker refuses to take the Father's place." Unquote. The second episode in the Mortis Trilogy is called The Altar of Mortis. The online synopsis reads, quote, "Before the Jedi can leave Mortis, the Son takes Ahsoka captive in an attempt to entice Anakin into joining him to use their combined strength to overpower his father and sister. To this end, the Son casts Ahsoka under the spell of the dark side. Meanwhile, the Father attempts to stave off a disastrous showdown between his children and maintain the Force's increasingly precarious balance on the planet. Fearing that the Son may be unstoppable, the daughter does the forbidden by taking Obi-Wan Kenobi to the Altar of Mortis, wherein is kept the Dagger of Mortis, a weapon capable of killing a Force wielder. The Son steals the weapon and attempts to use it against his father to steal his power and end his rule, but the daughter sacrifices herself, placing herself in front of the blade." Unquote. In the final episode of the Mortis Trilogy, entitled The Ghosts of Mortis, quote, "The Jedi remain stranded on Mortis, and the Son, aligned with the dark side of the Force, renews his efforts to convert Anakin as the Jedi prepare for a decisive confrontation. Anakin is stunned by the images of his dark future. The Son promises him the power to avert this destiny. The Father recognizes that the Son has broken the rules of time. He wipes Anakin's memory of these future visions and steals the Mortis dagger to end the conflict. The Father impales himself, thus preventing the Son from stealing his power. The Son, stunned by this, is run through by Anakin. With all 3 Force wielders destroyed, the imbalance in the Force disappears on Mortis. The 3 Jedi are transported back to the galaxy proper, apparently at the moment that they disappeared." Unquote. Like the redefined nature of the Force of Star Wars, Momaday's Housemaid of Dawn challenges the reader to reevaluate the struggle between good versus evil, as well as consider the plight of mixed-blood Native Americans' search for an identity within the full-blood Indian community and the oppressive Euro-American culture. A word of caution to potential readers, the structure of House is tricky. While calendar dates are posted in various sections of the book, hinting at what would seem to be a linear storytelling timeline, Housemaid of Dawn transports the reader back and forth in time through journal entries, flashbacks, and other storytelling devices. And while non-native readers could interpret the story as linear, the beginning and end of this cyclical narrative share the same scene, Abel running towards the dawn. This difference in interpretation is due to Indian and non-Indian perception of time. As Paula Gunn Allen points out in her essay, The Sacred Hoop, 2 ways of perceiving reality lies in, quote, "the tendency of the American Indian to view space as spherical and time as cyclical, whereas the non-Indian tends to view space as linear and time as sequential." Unquote. This cyclical approach of storytelling is also used in the Clone Wars Mortis Trilogy. On the planet Mortis, Obi-Wan Kenobi notes that the environment around our heroes is constantly changing, as if from spring to summer to autumn, then winter, in the course of a day. Another interruption in the standard timeline occurs when the evil Son shows Anakin his future. Though clouded, Anakin's future reveals the harm he will cause as Darth Vader, killing children, murdering his wife, challenging his master Obi-Wan, and participating in the obliteration of an entire planet. The strongest cyclical element of the story is that the Mortis three-episodic tale both starts and ends at the same point in time and space, with Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Ahsoka in their spaceship at the same coordinates at the same time, as if they never left the ship or experienced their multi-day adventure on Mortis. But the connection between Momaday's novel and Taylor's teleplay do not end there. House Made of Dawn is filled with dynamic and intriguing characters that interact with the protagonist Abel, but none of these side characters merit as much critical and analytical attention as the ominous Albino Rider. Whether intentional or not, the albino has many similarities with the Clone Wars' Son of Mortis. First mentioned on page 42 of House Made of Dawn, the Albino Rider is described as, quote, large and white-skinned. He wore little round-colored glasses and rode a fine black horse of good blood, unquote. In this introductory scene, the albino is a competitor alongside Uneasy Abel in a primitive contest involving men riding on horseback who must reach down to the ground to seize a half-buried rooster by the neck, violently pulling the creature up out of the ground, then, ultimately, ripping the rooster apart in honor of an ancient tradition. Abel, still uncertain of himself, fails miserably at the task, while the albino is menacing in his victory. From the beginning, the albino is described as, quote, large and thickset, powerful and deliberate in his movements, unquote. Angela, Abel's would-be lover, watches the scene and notes that the albino's movement during this violent scene are, quote, a perfect commotion, full of symmetry and sound. And yet, there was something out of place, some flaw in proportion or design, some unnatural thing, unquote. That unnatural thing is that the albino is evil, an evil that Abel attempts to destroy later in the story. The key to the manifestation of evil via the albino is his whiteness. As early as page 12 in House Made of Dawn, Momaday sets up that the color white represents evil when Momaday depicts a roadside witch with a white mustache that frightens and curses passers-by. The albino is further described through the point of view of Abel's lover Angela as having tight white skin and round black glasses. As he rides up to her, he is, quote, directly above her for one instant, huge and hideous at the extremity of the terrified bird, unquote. While the design of the planet Mortis and its inhabitants come from a multitude of cinematic inspirations, including Avatar, Lord of the Rings, and Disney's Tron Legacy, the sun in the Mortis Trilogy is strikingly similar to Momaday's evil albino in House Made of Dawn. Ominous and imposing, the sun is designed to be 2.2 meters tall in his humanoid form, with only the father measuring slightly taller. In gargoyle form, the sun is an impressive 4.79 meters tall, with a wingspan over 11 meters. In other words, massive, especially when standing over Anakin and his peers. Even the camera movements around the sun ped or rise up over Anakin, creating the illusion that the sun is rising up to his full stature, forcing the Jedi to look up at him. The sun also has the pasty white skin of the albino, and, like the albino's little round glasses, the sun's pupils are little round red lights within jet black eye sockets. The sun's frequent transformation into the gargoyle could be described in the same fashion Momaday describes the Albino Rider above Angela, quote, for one instant, huge and hideous at the extremity of the terrified bird. It is also a nice touch that the gargoyle is like a terrified bird, often menacingly squawking and flapping its wings at Anakin, Ahsoka, and Obi-Wan. While the rooster challenge is the first sighting of the albino in Momaday's novel, the albino's death at the hands of Abel is the last and most memorable albino scene. It begins with Abel and the albino talking in a local bar at night, with the albino occasionally laughing. Momaday writes that the albino's laughter sounds, quote, too high on the scale and ended in a strange, inhuman cry, as of pain. It was an old woman's laugh, thin and weak as water, unquote. After this description, both the albino and Abel exit the bar into the darkness and rain, where the albino attempts to hug Abel. Abel then stabs him in the chest with a knife, and the albino continues to embrace Abel. Despite his efforts to break free, Abel is trapped within the embrace, and he stabs the albino again, this time in the groin. An evil and tragic use of the embrace is used several times in the Mortis Trilogy as well. While sleeping at the father's castle, the son appears to Anakin at night disguised as Anakin's deceased biological mother. Disoriented, Anakin permits the son, under the guise of his own mother, to embrace him and talk softly and sweetly to him. Like the albino, the son is capable of creating old woman sounds and dialogue. The son's death is also similar to the murder of the albino. While Anakin's stabbing of the son in the Mortis finale is not as graphic as Momaday's depiction of the albino's demise in Housemaid of Dawn, it is equally unnerving as Anakin stabs the son in the back while the dying father embraces his sorrowful son. The difference between Housemaid of Dawn and the Clone Wars Mortis trilogy lies in the significance of the deaths of the evil characters in terms of cosmic balance. While Anakin's assassination of the son supposedly restores a balance to the Force on Mortis and fulfilling what is deemed to be his destiny by bringing balance to the Force, Abel's murdering of the albino does not destroy evil, but rather it creates an imbalance within Housemaid of Dawn and is what many critics call Abel's crucial mistake. Lewis Owens of Choctaw, Cherokee, Irish descent and professor of literature at the University of New Mexico calls Abel's murder of the albino a foolish mistake, since he, like the main character Tayo in Leslie Silko's novel Ceremony, must understand that, quote, good and evil must coexist in a delicate balance, unquote. Momaday pushes this belief upon the reader with the intent of not only acknowledging his Indian brethren's belief systems regarding good and evil, but to challenge Christianity's authority on the subject. Essayist Larry N. Landrum explains that Housemaid of Dawn exemplifies Kiowan beliefs on the matters of good and evil. Quote, unlike Christianity, which contrasts light and dark, several kinds of local knowledge support the view that light and dark supplement one another, unquote. To further illustrate this point, Landrum cites several examples in Housemaid of Dawn, the most poetic being the discussion between Abel and his grandfather, Francisco, about how to see and appreciate shafts of light in the canyon. Lewis Owens also comments on how Francisco is Momaday's one character that is fully aware of the albino's evil presence, and that House's clear message is that in order to avoid becoming evil, or even merely fueling witchery and all that is evil, each person must watch and control evil. In Owens' words, quote, evil cannot be destroyed, and to attempt to do so is to commit a dangerous error that would upset the delicate balance of the world, unquote. Good and evil have been at the heart of Star Wars from the get-go of the original trilogy, and the prequels further polarize the Jedi Knights / the light side of the Force against the Sith / dark side of the Force. This black and white portrayal of good and evil is ideal for the type of sci-fi fantasy Star Wars is known for. However, the Clone Wars not only enters the gray area between light and dark, it resides there. The Jedi Knights are no longer simple guardians of peace and justice, but are now commanders of soldiers entrenched in a seemingly endless war. This makes the Mortis episodes even more intriguing. In these episodes, 3 Jedi are pulled out of the gray area of the war and thrown into a world where it seems both light and dark are clearly defined. But as the episodes progress, Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Ahsoka Tano must deal with the Son, who answers accusations of being Sith, the Star Wars equivalent of evil, with both yes and no replies. To complicate their situation, the beautiful good daughter loves her evil brother and is compelled to fight him in order to protect her father. Meanwhile, the father wished for Anakin to replace him and his watch over his good and evil offspring. In seizing the Jedi trio, the father is forcing the Jedi to rethink their Christian-like belief of good and evil and accept a more Indian approach to universal balance. What further enriches this aspect of the Star Wars canon is that Anakin is a tragic messiah figure, dubbed the Chosen One, who, as Obi-Wan Kenobi exclaims in Episode 3, is supposed to bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness. While it is certainly debatable whether or not Mortis writer Christian Taylor read N. Scott Momaday's Housemaid of Dawn, not to mention if he's even directly referencing the novel within these 3 Clone Wars episodes on the planet Mortis, it is undeniable that both works of art share an overwhelming amount of common themes. character designs, and story elements that are ultimately challenging their audiences to rethink good and evil. Both Momaday and Taylor's work succeed when they ignite conversations about acceptance and ultimately balance. And with that, I invite your comments and feedback regarding this episode on our website at diggingstarwars.blogspot.com. Please join us next month for the Digging Star Wars Season 1 finale, where we will explore another cyclical timeline narrative, James Cameron's The Terminator, and its connections to Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. As always, thanks for listening.
Digging Star Wars is produced by Mitch Media and has no connection to Lucasfilm Limited whatsoever. Copyrights for films, trademark characters, and related materials discussed in Digging Star Wars remain with their respective owners. For a list of references or source material, please send an email to diggingstarwars@gmail.com.